infinite complaisance, people went to and fro the earth about their little affairs, serene in the assurance of their dominion over this small, spinning fragment of solar driftwood, which by chance or design man has inherited out of the dark mystery of time and space.
So on this episode of Into the Fray, I welcome Michael on with me. And Michael, I know a little teensy bit of what we're going to be talking about because of what your wife mentioned before to me, but I don't know any of the details, which is a great thing. And I am looking forward to talking with you about your experiences. So welcome on the show.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Shannon. I appreciate it. Yeah, it's an interesting journey, but I do thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you just for being willing to share, as I like to say to everybody, because it's not the easiest thing to do. I realize that. So, Michael, I don't know where you want to start, where you think that we should start, but that I'm handing the reins over to you.
Okay. Well, I think I'll just start from my birth. I don't know the clear story of my adoption, but I've heard all kinds of different stories about it. So all I know for sure is that I was adopted, and I was born in Tijuana, and then brought it to the States, where my birth parents adopted me. And since I can remember being a kid, I've had supernatural encounters, and they started around 8 years old. And I also have a twin sister, which will be a little bit significant and in the end of the encounters that I had towards the end of this timeline. So I do have a twin sister. I grew up like in a very I didn't want for anything. My parents loved me. They took care of us. We have another brother. He's adopted from Vietnam. But anyhow, it was we had a really good bringing up until I was 8 years old, and I was laying on my mom's side of the bed, closest to the wall, and I was just laying there, looking at the wall, like just like any kid would do, just laying there and waiting. I was laid down to take my nap, and out of the wall came what I could only describe as Satan. At this point, that's the only terminology I could come up with. If it was not Satan, then it was definitely a demonic entity. And when it came out of the wall at me, it was half beast, half what I saw was a male torso, and it was like, I want to say like a kangaroo looking from the waist down. And then I know all this sounds kind of cliche, but when you're 8 years old and you see this, I don't think there was too many descriptions at that time of depictions of Satan or demons. And so anyway, it had a straw hat on, and it had a Hawaiian shirt on, and it was walking very cocky towards me. And I wasn't scared at all. I was just like, what is going on here? And it came out of the wall at me. It took its right hand and it put it on. He put it on my head, and he said, "I got you." And from that day forward, things were just happening that were not of a 8-year-old's nature. I don't want to get into explicit details, but because I really don't know how explicit this platform is, but it was just it was weird. It was very weird, but I wasn't scared. So anyway, I went through like running with a motorcycle, all outlaw club, and just kind of a wild child there for a while. And so when I was like 32, 33, Shannon, one thing I have to say is that I had these kind of encounters all through my life. I mean, all through my life. And it was never something I got afraid of. It was just part of my life. So I dealt with this stuff ever since I was a little boy. And there's a lot. I mean, I could tell you story after story after story, but I guess for the sake of time, I'm just doing a few points here. So moving into all through my adolescence, my teen years, just seeing a lot of demonic stuff. It's just crazy. Anyway, when I was about 32, 33, I started to get my life kind of back on track after being somewhat wild for some years. And it just seemed like as I was trying to turn my life in a better direction, things got worse. And my parents had gotten me a condo there's a little town in the desert called Silver Lakes. It was beautiful. It's basically a resort. It's got 2 lakes on there. And it was really pretty. Anyway, my parents lived there, and then I was trying to just get on the straight and narrow. And so they bought me a condo across from where I was at, across the golf course. And I was laying in my bed, and I wasn't quite asleep yet. And there's been, all kinds of instances where entities would come to my door. And after knowing what we know now, kind of about the UFO scene and stuff like that, I'd just say that they were female in nature, and they had red eyes, and they were twins. And the first entity was standing in my doorway to my room, and I sat up, and I was just like, what is going on? And it was so shocking. Like, again, I wasn't scared. Sometimes they just shock you when they just show up, because I didn't hear a front door open. I didn't hear, how sometimes you can hear people walking down a hall brushing their feet against the carpet. I didn't hear any of that. As a matter of fact, when they both, one was lined up behind the other, and when one of them stood in the door, I realized that she wasn't touching the floor. One of the main things I saw was they had, like, let's see, kind of like a translucent light gray, light bluish, like, gown, but you could see through it. And when I sat up and I looked at her, she charged me. And at that time I was a big boy. I was a lineman, climbing telephone poles, so it was really physical, hard work. And I was a big boy, and the thing that shocked me is that this entity was able to hold me down with one hand, and basically it raped me. And then when that entity was done, the other one, did the same thing. The thing that stuck out to me was, while they were on top of me, they would look down at me, and their big glowing red eyes would look at me, and they would open their mouths, and the tongue was forked and slim and long. So sometimes I want to think that it possibly was like a reptilian in nature, but at that time, I had no way of how to describing it. All I could say was an entity. So the second one and did the same thing. It all when it was all said and done, I wasn't frightened. I was just, like, I guess, panicked. I was panicking a little bit, and I was, like, running around the apartment with, like, a head with a chicken cut, like a chicken with his head cut off. I was like, like a man's man kind of guy, and I'm, like, thinking to myself, how can this happen? Like, how does this even happen? How can women hold me down with one arm? And and also I want to say it wasn't a pleasant experience. It was just so shocking. Anyway, so they left just as they came. They were gone, and I really had a huge sense that when they were gone, they were there to be inseminated, or yeah, I just got a huge, like, it was an overwhelming feeling, and I don't like that word, overwhelming, but it was literally an overwhelming feeling of they came here to breed. Anyway, and then I was in that same period, I was starting to do, like, big events, big rock shows, and producing them at the hometown I was in, and then I went from there to the Rose Bowl, and then from there to Irvine Meadows when that was open, doing big gigs. And about 2 weeks before my first gig. I was also promoting for other large bands. And about 2 weeks before my first gig, two other entities came in. And again, they were not, it didn't seem like they were touching the floor, touching the ground. But these entities were cloaked, and I couldn't see their faces, or I couldn't see their bone structure or anything like that. All I saw was darkness. And that one was a little bit more horrific. They used more of instruments, and I was like screaming my head off. I was just screaming. And what I don't understand is I was screaming as loud as I could, but the neighbors couldn't hear me. And I was, crying out for help, but I mean, I lived in a condo that lived right next to two other condos, and that's always been a mystery to me how they could not hear what I was saying. So after this thing happened to me, so like this is like the second major painful event that I went through. They left as soon as they seemed to. I was in such pain that I don't even know how they left. Again, I didn't hear a door open. I didn't hear a window slide. I didn't hear my back door sliding. They just showed up in my room. So this all took a bit of a toll on me, and I have a bit of a famous friend who is familiar with all this stuff, and so I called her, and I knew that she had some contacts that dealt with this stuff, and so I called her, and it was like 6 months later until I was able to talk about it, and I finally talked to one of my friends. She told me to pack my bags, that I was gonna go away for a while to go healed up, because that was my when after all that happened, my mind and my heart and my spirit and my soul were so torn that I felt like I'm just being real. I felt like I lost my manhood. You know what I mean? It was not a good time. So after that, so I went to Northern California, and I went to a place where these group of people dealt with entities, and this group actually had adopted the daughter of Anton Lavey, and they went through years of a healing process with her, and she became a very good friend of mine. And I went up there to heal, but it seems like I kind of got thrown into another battle. I know that I was there to heal, and I'm not saying that there was no healing in the process, but it's like I don't know if this is fair to say, but like it took the warfare to a whole nother level that I ever knew, and between the forces of good and the forces of evil, and there to heal, I stayed in these people's home, and they started to take care of me, and kind of it was really like one of the only peoples on the scene that could actually understand like the things I was going through. And so I was up there for, I think, about a year to 2 years. I was up there on and off. So one of the last instances that I wanted to share with you again, Shannon. I mean, I have story after story after story. This is just a short version. But the last story that I have for you is, so when I went to this home, these people were well known for dealing with these kinds of things, thus nursing the daughter of Anton Lavey back to some healing. And I had the fortunate to meet all those people, including the daughter of Anton. And I stayed in their home, and not too long, well, I want to say about 2 or 3 months after I got there, the main people had a vacation planned. And so they took off on vacation and they kind of left me to, I don't know, say rule the house, but just like kind of look out for the house when they got back. So just to give you a bit of a point of reference, the daughter of Anton, when it became around Halloween time, it got very intense with her and things that she would go through. And so like I was downstairs in their home. I'll just call this woman Mama. That was my nickname for her. Mama was screaming, or yelling my name from the upstairs bedroom, and I ran upstairs, and there was like a black wall preventing me from getting into this room. I could see into the room, but it was like a black mist, but it looked like a wall. And I just stood there and to be honest with you, just prayed a minute, and the wall broke. And then I was able to enter into the building, into the room. I looked at Mama, and Mama looked at me. Mama looked quite shocked. I didn't see fear on her face, but she was definitely shocked. She looks at me, I look at her, and then she just kind of moves her eyes to the left, or to the right, and there standing in the corner was the daughter of Anton. And so I look over there, and I take steps towards Mama, and she whispers in her ear, in my ear, and says, "Grab her, but don't touch her. Don't hurt her." And I said, "Okay." I had never seen anything like this before. So what had happened is she was standing in the corner, and she was yelling all kinds of profanity. And then she says, "I'm going to effing kill you," referring to Mama, which this is the lady who adopted her. And when that happened, she came off the ground, didn't touch the ground at all, and flew across the room and tried to grab Mama's throat. And I jumped and I'm not trying to be a hero, I'm just doing what she told me to do. I jumped in front of her and I grabbed her. And I want to tell you that this lady, the daughter of Anton, is only like literally like only 4 feet tall, and just mangled from all the ritual abuse. And she was trying to get at Mama. So I jumped and I just started saying things into her ear, things of love. And I had to do it for about 5-10 minutes, and this whole time I got her like bear hugged so she can't move her arms, and we're all over the floor. I I wrestled her down to the bed so she wouldn't hurt herself, and it finally broke, and I gently started to let her go very easily to make sure that this thing wasn't lying to me. And then she got up. She had a bracelet on her arm when this happened. She had a bracelet. She went back to the same corner that she was in, that we began at. That entity came back into her, and it looked at me, and she had that bracelet in her arm, in her hand, and she looked at me straight face, looked at me, and her eyes would turn black. So I knew at some point, I knew what was going on. But she looked at me with those black eyes, and she opened up her hand, and the bracelet flew across the room with nobody touching it. It just flew across the room. And I was like, "Oh, here we go again." So she was yelling profanities, and again she came off the floor and tried to get at Mama again. And same deal. I just grabbed her and started saying peaceful things, loving things into her ear, and it stopped. I eventually had to get. I eventually stopped living at that home after about, oh, I don't know, about 4 or 5 months, I started having dreams of that lady coming in and hitting me with an axe in the head. And so like I'm like, man, I think it's time for me to leave. So anyway, I did stay up there for quite a bit more time, but as far as being involved with that whole deal, it was time for me. It was time for me to exit the house, and I could stay up there and keep working with those people for healing, but I no longer felt comfortable in the house. So those are those are pretty much some of my, just a couple of the things that I went through. I didn't really know how deep you wanted me to go with all this, but that's part of my story.
That's pretty fascinating that you ended up at a place that housed Anton Lavey's daughter. And I am not super familiar with all of that with him and his family and his kids. Was she taken from him at an earlier age and then just happened to be there at that same time? Or did she willingly go to this place for the very same reason that you were there?
She was seeking refuge, the way that it was told to me, that so she was, this is what I was told. So on her father's side, the lineage was Anton Lavey on her father's side. On her mother's side, it was the great grandfather. And we're talking about another generation that's maybe two or generations older than me. You know what I mean? So, but she's not. She's an elderly lady now. But on her mother's side, the great grandfather was Aleister Crowley. So she was being, at that time, by individuals on the dark side. She was being raised up to be the bride of Satan. And man, I saw things that, you see these movies, and I literally saw this stuff firsthand. And and I only saw the mild side of things. I mean, most people, the way I say it, if you don't know who you are, then you wouldn't be able to stand in those kind of presences. Does that make sense? You gotta know who you are. You ever seen that movie, The Never Ending Story?
Oh, of course, yeah.
You know how when Atreyu was going through those oracles,
Mm-hmm.
and he had to know who he was without any doubt at all? That's the same thing when you stand in the presence of evil. You have to know who you are, or you will not stand. You won't make it through. I had to learn, like, from jumping into the shallow pool and into the big pool. I never dealt with anything like that before until I went away. But it was just training ground for, possibly in the hopes that one day helping other people.
It seems like, and I understand that they went on a little vacay and they left you there, probably to watch the house, and she was also there. It just seems to me like someone like Anton Lavey's daughter, and then also a descendant of Aleister Crowley. I mean, what a convergence of things, right?
Yeah.
Leaving anyone there, and this is nothing personally against her. I realize that, I'm sure, I don't know a whole lot about it, but it sounds like she was subjected to things that she had no control over, I'm sure, from a very young age. I guess grooming would be the word. I can't think of anything darker than that. But leaving you there with her just didn't seem like maybe the best kind of an idea on their part. Or did they say, hey, Michael, she might be here, or I don't know if she's staying in the same house and you knew that, but was there a second thought to that on anybody's part? Like, hey, this could
Well,
get a little dramatic.
yeah, I'm trying to say things so I don't give away the names. But let me put it this way: these leaders were surrounded by thousands of people that could intervene to help at any time. Thousands. They had a huge organization up there. And she was never, like, when I was there, we didn't exactly hover over her, but you could definitely tell when there was an episode. So, like, I don't. I may have been. Let me say this. When I went into that house that I was telling you about, so it was very much like a community house. It was old Victorian style house, and each room was filled with someone who was a caretaker of the house or assistants to the leaders. So it wasn't just me and her in the house. It was two other ladies too, and but because they know the nature of my story, that I knew of things that some people don't in terms of the dark side. It seems like I was just there at the right time to be of any help. And plus, I mean, these guys do this kind of stuff like 24/7 for months on end, and I couldn't. Apparently, they already had a vacation planned, and I couldn't tell them, man, you can't go nowhere. Does that make sense?
Any of my questioning, of course, if I'm getting to a place that you can't speak about, just simply say, no, I'm not going to go there. I'm not going to take offense to it at all. But so you kind of just said something. You said that you know more than others that were around you of the dark side. How or why would that be? And again, only if you want to answer that.
No, that's a great question. So, because of I seen evil I don't know if operates the right word, but manifests itself to me since I was a little boy, Shannon. Like you cannot tell me that evil's not real. It's just like you can't tell me that. I've done just like we're doing interviews here. I've done interviews with people with kids who've gone through rituals and they're grown up. I actually did an interview. Well, let me finish your question. Because I know that of the things that I went through, I'm being very mild about what I'm telling you. I'm not I'm not getting explicit. I don't know. I'm just being careful because of the audience. But I've gone through this kind of stuff since I was a little boy. So I know for a fact that there's evil in this world. And because I know that there's evil, this is just my experience. I'm not expecting anybody to agree with me or jump on my bandwagon. This is my perspective. Because I know that there's evil, I know there's a God. And so like these organizations that was in California in a place called Yuba City. And up there is a group, I'll just say it's a church group who the pastors adopted Anton's daughter. So I can't say her name, but she came there for refuge and because she was being bred to be the bride of Satan. And Shannon, the torture that I heard that she went through as a child is just horrific. So getting back to your question, the things that I have directly interviewed my wife and I have directly interviewed children who grew up in these kind of environments and lived to tell about it. So check this out. I went to go help somebody on a film project in Utah and got there. This lady invited 6 people to come to her house who've been through rituals. And when we got there, the last one who entered into the house, she was so fragmented, it looked like she was on drugs. And I can tell when people are on drugs or not. That was part of the world I delved into. But anyway, she came in and she was so fragmented, she couldn't even sit down. And finally, my wife started talking to her, and I started talking to her, and finally she was able to sit down. Well, it just so happened that there was 2 couples on the end, 2 couples in the middle, and then another couple on the end. So there was I believe it was like 6 or 7 people there. This is what happened. The girl, so everybody's married now except for the girl in the end. They're all married. The guy says to the girl, one of the ladies on the other side of the couch, said, "You look familiar." And I just let it play out. I didn't interrupt it. I just let it play out. And she looked at the guy and she said, "Yes, you look familiar too." the guy says to the lady, says, were you ever sitting on a staircase with another little boy waiting for your turn to go watch this baby be killed and do the ritual? And she goes, oh my God, yes. She goes, I was the little boy that was holding you. And I was like, what in the world? They were actually, they both knew each other from childhood, but the little boy was holding the little girl because they were so afraid. They were so scared. So I don't want to get into the things that these interviews that we did. I mean, they were horrific. We were trying to just help people work through all that. So I don't know if I answered your question.
No, you absolutely did. I can't imagine the things that people have gone through, and then they're able to, as best they can, go about their daily lives after going through some of the darkest things that a one person can do to another is pretty fascinating to me. So let's talk a little bit about some of the things that you've covered about your experiences, if you don't mind.
No.
The twins, the first set of twins that you could see that were not cloaked. What, if any, were the differences physically between these twins? Was there any differences in them?
That's a great question. No one's ever asked me that question. So all I can say is one set of twins were of female nature, and the other set of twins were of male nature.
Well,
It
actually, I'm sorry, Michael. I should have been more clear. I meant the very first set of twins only, just between those two ladies. Were they exactly the same?
The way I remember it, yes, they were. I didn't, and I think I just know, when you know something, you can't explain it. You just can't explain it, but you know it. I just know in my heart that I don't know what it is yet, but the twin thing represents something. I know it does. They came in sets of twos. It happened twice. You know what I mean?
And you're a twin.
And I'm a twin.
Has your twin sister ever experienced anything?
I believe so. Well, I've never, just to be honest with you, I just recently, my sister and I have been on this journey of mending our relationship. I wasn't the nicest guy to have a relationship when I was younger and trying to be something that the world depicts as cool. My mom died, and that really, both my parents died within 2 years of each other. And so we realized that all we got left is us and our little brother. So it's been on the mend. So to answer your question, I think she does. She has had some experiences, but nothing to take away from anybody who's really educated. But in my limited knowledge of things, she started to get like really book smart, and she started relying more on what books say than possible accounts that people have. So I think I do remember her saying something, but she, to the best of my knowledge, I don't think she acknowledges it anymore.
Okay, so 8 years old, you see the kangaroo-looking half man, half beast, essentially entity right through the wall, and that's at 8.
Yeah.
Was there anything at all prior to that you can consciously remember?
Yes. It seems to be that I also saw cloaked entities in the corner of my room. We all had our own room. It seemed like at times when I was little, I'd be in my bed and I'd wake up and I'd see something cloaked, like in the corner of my room, but nothing, like a flash or something. But prior to that, I really don't. Well, our adoption was really kind of rough. We were kidnapped after my parents had custody of us. They kind of, the birth parents kind of the people who gave us up. They kind of manipulated my mom. She wanted to see us. So, of course, my mom said yes. And I guess, I'm not sure quite. I think they went over to my mom's house. They grabbed my sister and they went out a back window. My mom was holding, was my not my birth mom, but my adopted mom had a hold of me. And these other people had a hold of me and they wouldn't let go. So I was screaming. Finally, my adopted mom let go so I would stop crying. And they went out a back window with both of us. And there was a manhunt to try to find us for, I think it was like a week. I think it was. And then they actually found us. I guess the guy who had taken us was going back into Mexico. They had the borders kind of checked, like spotted out, and the guy came off a bus with us both in his arms. My dad was there with the police, and my dad, my adopted dad was there with the police, and they grabbed him and got us back.
Were you guys forcibly taken from your birth parents?
No, that's the crazy thing. We were not.
So why so they gave you up and then they're trying to kidnap you back? I mean,
yeah. Well, see, like I said, is for some reason, I was like the least that they would tell me what happened. And I'm not sure why. The only reason I can think why they would not keep the whole story away from me is because I was a bit of a violent person. And they just didn't want me to get stupid or something. And I was young-minded and out to prove to the world that, that I was somebody. But that's the only reason why I can think that they really didn't give me the whole skinnies on the situation. So I don't know. Does that answer your question?
yes, absolutely. No, I appreciate that. Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
So
Yeah.
because you've mentioned the word cloaked now a couple of times. Now that you've mentioned the entities in your room, even prior to this half man, half beast entity at 8, and then the other set of twins that you felt had a male energy to them, the ones that raped you. I'm sorry about all of that situation, by the way. Cannot imagine. When you say cloaked, do you actually mean they're wearing cloaks and they're hooded, or do you mean cloak like they're just misty, dark, amorphous figures?
No, it was like tangible. The only thing that I can really say is a manifestation into this realm, in the natural realm. It's always being raped at all. It's never like, it's not I understand why people don't want to talk about it, but I'm not going to hide behind stuff just because I may be afraid. That's not who I am. I'm not going to hide. And if this story helps somebody else, then great. But I'm not going to hide because I'm afraid of letting this be known. Just not going to do it. So can you repeat your question again?
No, that's
Please?
okay. Just the fact that they're cloaked. You kept mentioning cloaked. I just wanted to know if that just meant that they were essentially like shadow people, or that they were actually wearing a cloak and their faces were just amorphous and you couldn't see because they happened to be in shadow because of an actual cloak.
Right. It was, okay. I think I could describe it like this. There was a black mass cloaked in human form. Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely.
Because I couldn't see the bodies. I couldn't see the faces. All I could see is the garment. It was like looking into an abyss. Like there's just nothing there. There's no substance of a person. It was just dark and evil.
And so that's why the second set of twins, that is an accurate depiction then, that you could just tell that they were male by their energies. That's why you're knowing that, these are completely different than the two females, unless they can change forms, of course, which maybe they can. And maybe it was an intimidation and fear factor to come and show themselves like that to you the second time. I don't know. Because you
Well,
admitted in the first one it wasn't the same for you, right? The second time was worse, it sounds, which who could blame you?
well, I'm not trying to be disrespectful or rude. I'm just being matter of fact. When the ladies came in, and this is what riddled me in guilt afterwards. When they were done, I was like thinking to myself, how could how could how could I release and call myself a good man, or try to be a good man? I was just like, because it was such a shocking experience. But on the other side of the coin, it felt like, man, I can't even explain this part. It felt like they were there for my seed. That's what it felt like. They were there. They were on a mission to get my seed. I know that may sound crazy, but that's exactly how I felt when they were done. With the males, it was more about the torture. It was more about the torture. The second time really made me question my own humanity when the male subjects, so to speak, the cloaked subjects, it just, I was like, why is this? I'm definitely not playing the victim card, but you wonder why individuals go through these kinds of things. I'm not. I hate the victim card. I'm not a victim. It's just that's the reality of things that happen to me. But I've had encounters where I'll just tell you. So I was at my mom's house, and again, I was laying in bed. The hall light was on. The hall light that went into the room that I was staying in. The whole light was on. And I felt a presence. I felt a presence in my room, or not in my room, but I felt a presence watching me. I sat up. I could see a silhouette of a man standing in my doorway. And I was taught that everything that I grew up in a pastor's family. Both my parents were pastors, and I grew up being taught not to speak to them, but that I could ask them their name, and they would have to tell me. And so when this happened, it felt like more I was speaking to a human being. On those others encounters I talked to you about, it was definitely an entity, an alien, or don't know for sure. They weren't of this world. And so I see the silhouette of this man standing in the doorway of the room I'm staying in. And I sat up and I looked at him. I said, "Who are you?" And God is my witness. It responded to me and said, "I'm Harry Houdini, and I'm here to take you to hell." And he walked into the room. He walked around my bed. And Shannon, at this time in life, we didn't have laptops. I went, it came around the side of my bed, and then in front of my bed, and then went down the side of the side of my bed, closest to the wall. And he went to sit down, and up from the ground came like a desk and a chair for it to sit on. And it appeared to be only what I know now is a laptop popped up out of the desk. I came out of my body and I hovered above him and the desk, and I looked down at the screen, and it was in yellow, and they were I knew in my heart that these were words, but I couldn't read the words. They were emblems. They kind of look like hieroglyphics, I think they're called. They were just emblems. They're just signs and like triangles and squiggly lines and stuff like that. I hovered and went back into my body. And then when I came back into my body, two demons jumped on my bed. They had no head. For the only thing I could is, you know what a chimpanzee looks like?
Mm-hmm.
It looked like that, but with no head. There was no head on these creatures. They were just all arms. You know how long the chimpanzee arms are, and there was no legs. It was just a torso and feet. And so they took a, when you have a robe, you got a nice robe, and it's got that tie thing that ties the robe together.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I want to say it's a lanyard, whatever it is. But they took this robe tie, and they started wrapping me up in it. They didn't, and then I literally went through my bed and started going down into the ground, and I could start to feel the heat, and I could hear creatures or demons around me waiting to devour me. And I'm not trying to get people to subscribe to my channel or my belief system. I'm just telling you what worked for me. Because of my upbringing, that was terrifying. That one right there was terrifying. The things that await us on the other side. Oh man, that was terrifying. And so I called upon the name of Jesus, and as soon as I said that, I snapped back. I snapped back into my bed with me sitting up, and I climbed out of bed, and I ran up to my mom, and I told her what had just had happened. So that one right there was terrifying. That encounter was probably the scariest one out of all the encounters that I had.
Michael, I believe that you are the first person that I've spoken to that has had both incubus and succubus encounters, which is pretty awful, by the way. If you ask me, I'm just really sorry about everything that you've experienced with all of that. Why? And you alluded to this a little bit earlier. Why do you think each set of twins only had the one go at you? You had one experience with the females, one experience with the males. Why do you think that is?
Well, I think I don't like to I just have to quote you something first before I answer your question. Is that okay?
Absolutely.
It says, "We wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities and powers of darkness in heavenly places." So I think for most people that hell is considered a place beneath us. Then why would that quote say in heavenly places? So the beings that I'm talking about, I can almost guarantee they came from a realm around in higher than us. The reason why I'm telling you this is because if I'm not an expert like some of my buddies are, I'm not an expert. I'm just telling you my story. As far as encounter with the ladies, or I want some ladies, just the females, I know for a fact that they were there to breed with me, and that's it. It had nothing to do with pleasure or fun. That was not the business at hand. The business at hand was to breed or be inseminated. When it comes to the male figures, the reason why I gave you that quote first, because the male figures were not there to give me revelation on something. They were there to torment. Maybe I really don't want to say what actually happened when it happened with the male guys.
No, I don't blame you.
I'm a little embarrassed, but
okay.
if you want to ask me off camera, I'll tell you, because they were using instruments that that was horrible. It was horrible. But I'm not going to let those guys, I'm not going to show fear and back down. It might have happened once, but it will not happen again. I was in this place, and a lot of people were just falling down and stuff, and I had this little lady. I went to the back just to clear my mind and everything. I went to the back, and this little Asian lady came up to me, and she stuck her finger in my face, And she said, "You were meant to stand and not fall." Man, and that, like, it just, what fight I do have in me, I, I'm not, I'm not going to just like lay down. I'll get back up, and they're not going to get the best of me. And since I've taken that posture, I've had very little encounters since then.
So here's what I'm wondering
Sure.
is, and you may not know any of this, you may not want to know any of this. Who could blame you?
Mm-hmm.
Your birth family, your birth parents, do
Mm-hmm.
you have any information on what they were into, their religious beliefs or practices, any dark practices? I'm wondering, and I'm sure you've wondered this, why you? Why me? Why have I been essentially marked? Why are they, quote unquote, looking at me? Do you think it's possible your birth parents set some kind of a curse out there, or some kind of a mark on you and the family? And second part would be, do you think that's something? Plus, what about your adoptive mother and father? Have they had any activity, ever since adopting you guys?
Man, you asked some great questions. Angela, well, she thought the same thing you did about my birth parents. And from what I gathered from her interview and her like kind of briefing me on what you guys talked about, I do believe that you believe in generational being passed down from generation to generation, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So great question about my adopted parents. Sweetie, I don't know enough about my adopted parents. I'm actually, Angela and I are doing the ancestry to find out who more about my birth parents. And this isn't. I'm not trying to be disrespectful to my mom and dad, who I know as mom and dad. I'm not trying. Well, but what I am trying to do is, I know if I was a mother and I gave up 2 kids, I know you would, as a mother, it it's got to haunt her at some point. I wonder how my kids are doing.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? And the only reason why I really want to get into contact with them, even if they are dead, I have like 8 brothers and sisters somewhere out there, and I want them to know that we're totally fine. We're good. We grew. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, my parents rescued us from a life of poverty. I guess even as the story goes, my sister says that they hadn't changed my diaper in weeks, or
Mm.
not weeks, but the whole week that I was with them, they hadn't changed my diaper. So I had got really sick from not being changed. They just left me in a diaper. So I do believe, like you believe, that things can be passed down, but I also believe that they can be broken. That I know that they can be broken. I don't want I definitely wouldn't want my son to go through. I wouldn't want my kids to go through the things that I went through. So I try to, kids don't really want to listen to their mom and dads when they get to a certain point, because they know everything.
Absolutely.
But I try to be more strategic and effective when I talk to my kids now. I don't like my one boy. He saw me just trying to want to be an outlaw, and just. But to answer your question, yes, I do believe that things can be generational. But I think you can't really address it until you know it's a generational thing.
Right.
It's like someone has to have the light come on and then address it. So my my light came on, I want to say, at an early age. So yeah, I'm trying. No, I'm not trying. I am doing things to be effective in turning things around.
Those 8 brothers and sisters, I would assume that they all got adopted as well, away from the birth
No,
parents? Really?
no, no. Again, I'm not super clear on. I've heard story after story about our adoption. I've like before
Mm-hmm.
my dad died, I asked him, "Daddy, what happened? What really happened? Like, no bullshit. Just tell me what happened. Excuse my language, man. So he told us to the best of his ability. And it was a fight. All I know is that my last name, my birth last name was Garcia. And so now we're trying to figure out, I think it would be kind of cool to find out who my brothers and sisters are, and if they ever had encounters.
Absolutely. That's where I was going with that. I was like, I'm wondering what stories they have to tell. Well, especially if they, and wouldn't that be interesting? I was just going to say, especially if they had encounters, but it would almost be even more interesting if they didn't, because they stayed with them. And maybe that would bolster this idea that then you and your twin sister were essentially cursed because, you weren't with the family anymore.
Yes. I look at it two ways. One way, you can be a victim about the whole idea and be woe is me, and and just like, why me, and even though I did say that once, I say why me just out of the curiosity, not from a victim mentality. The other way people look at it is that perhaps, maybe, those individuals who go through those kinds of things are marked for greatness.
Well, it definitely can be, but it's still really effed up and it may not have even been it may not have even been your birth parents. It could have been their parents, your grandparents.
Yes.
that
True
were
story.
pissed, and, they're old school, and they're like, even though you were just a kid, you guys were just very young, and it's not your fault. Well, woe is you now, because your grandparents are going to place a curse on you. It's just an idea that I had, listening to this. Who knows if this is the truth, of course, but it's just an idea. So, okay, you mentioned the phrase, you've had entities that have come to your door.
Yeah.
What two-parter? What kinds of entities were these? Unless you've already covered them, just tell me that. That's fine.
Mm-hmm.
And have you ever then willingly opened the door to these entities, physically said, yes, please come in?
That is a great question. I think it's really, some things are done in ignorance, and I have never blatantly said yes. Angela and I were in a situation the other day where was asking me questions, and one of the things I've learned is I'm not partnering with anything on the dark side. I will not do it. I'm not, and I don't say yes, like come in, hang out with me. I don't do that. But when I say out of ignorance, knowing what I know now, you don't say yes to things that you don't want in your life. They can be very subtle, very, very subtle. But once you say yes, full permission has been granted to access to you.
Mm-hmm.
I have a friend. He's the third highest. This is the guy that you should interview. This guy, he's the third. He was at one point the third highest ranking warlock on the East Coast. He reigned over territories. We're talking like principality stuff. And he told me of an instance where he would always tell me, as soon as someone said yes, he was in. He had full access to their lives. And that stuck with me. So what happened was he went up to a homeless guy in a wheelchair in New York, and he asked him a question: Do you want me to tell you about your life? And no, this guy didn't know any better. And he's just trying to live life. He's trying to stay alive. And man, the guy said yes. And he's totally changed his life around. And he told me, he said, Michael, that was my in. As soon as he said yes, I was in. I was like, wow, it's just that simple. It isn't like, it's not even like an invitation. I'm not paranoid of it, but I am careful. That makes sense?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely it does. Well, once we're done recording, we'll talk about that guy.
Okay.
I have a guess as to who that is, but we'll get into that afterward. Okay.
Okay.
So you mentioned that the little lady that said what she said, and you haven't really had a whole lot of activity since, but prior to how long ago was that you talked to that little lady?
Actually, it just so happened I talked to her yesterday.
Okay. All right. So you've had activity in every single place that you've lived?
No, I live in a peaceful home. Those things are not allowed in this home. They're not allowed. But every other home that I lived in, they would call my name through the walls. And on my son's baby monitor, they would. At one time, I had my brother's daughter living with me in my house, and she pulled me aside and she says, "What's going on with this house?" I go, "What do you mean?" She goes, "When I'm cooking, my hair gets pulled." I'm like, "Oh, yeah, yeah." And I told her, I said, "There's just things in this house." And at that point in my life, it was following me from home to home. I don't even like to call them homes. It was just from house to house. Home is where my treasure lays.
Have you ever seen lights in the sky or UFOs?
You know what? I was telling Angela the other day. So, we look up into the sky and you could see stars kind of flutter a little bit. They'll flutter like, and maybe it's just because of the atmosphere or the air in the sky. I'm not sure why, but sometimes they'll flutter. And I know with aircraft, they have to have a light structure on their aircraft to let them know, other people know that it's an aircraft. Maybe people on the ground, maybe towers and other airplanes. But one day this was when I was a lineman, I was up on a telephone pole and I was working on this telephone pole for like probably about 4 or 6 hours. And I noticed something very odd up in the sky. And if any of your audience can speak to this, I'd love to hear what they have to say. So I was working on this pole, and this super bright light, it stood out. It stood out among all the rest. And every time I looked up to look at this thing, it looked like it got closer and closer to where I was and brighter. And I'm like, it doesn't have a strobing light on it. So what can this be? And so like I had to work all through the night. And by the time it was almost dusk, it seemed like it was maybe 500 feet away from me. And I'm like, what is that? So that's probably the closest thing that possibly could have been, because I mean this thing hovered there for hours. It hovered or came closer to me for hours and hours. It puzzled me. So could it have been an aircraft? I mean, a UFO? Possibly, but I can't say for sure.
Oh, it's just something to note. Folks like you that have these varying experiences, I always like to mention that if it doesn't come up, because sometimes it'll kind of jar something loose, or you're like, oh yeah, no, I actually have. You just maybe don't think to mention that. So I just wanted to bring that up. And before I forget, because I keep looking at my notes and I'm like, oh, I didn't mention that, and then we move on. Michael's wife, Angela, was on the very previous episode to this one, 445. And so everybody can go listen to that. That is Michael's wife. Okay, so final question for you, Michael.
Yes, ma'am.
Because we have talked about essentially demonic type activity, shadow entities, figures, people, whatever you want to call them, cloaked entities, and then you just mentioned hair pulling incidents with your niece that lived at one of your properties. So that's like poltergeist, right? I mean, that's classic poltergeist activity. In your opinion, and you're not going to know the final answer to this, I just want your opinion. Do you think this is one thing that masquerades as many different types of things, or do you think these are all separate?
Ooh, that's a great question. Man, you got some good questions, Shannon.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So I think I can parallel this. You got the human race, right? Within that human race, you got your different ethnicities. I think that, and I'm not saying this from a paranoid side. You asked my opinion. This is my opinion. I think they're all playing ball on the same side. They could either be masqueraded. There's another guy that we do movies with. He calls them avatars. possible avatars. I was like, "Oh, that's interesting."
That's a good term. I like that.
Yeah, we saw him yesterday in interviewing somebody who said that they're an avatar. I think anybody, anything that comes to you and just blatantly outright hurts you, violates you without any kind of permission, I think that they're playing on the same side of, dare I say, evil, because you can't trust that side to even give you truth, because it's all manipulation and lies and that kind of thing. And so that may answer your question right there. They may manipulate us to think it's something, but at the end of the day, where I regulate from a place of peace. If there's and not a false sense of peace, a true peace. That's a great question. I don't know if there's, because I think some of them they just show up as they are, like no filter. And I think other times, let me ask you a question. Now, are you referring to the alien world or to entities?
I mean, that could all be the same thing too. So,
Right.
that's tough, because a lot of people, it depends on what glasses you've got on or what your beliefs are, because a lot of people see quote unquote alien activity exactly the same as poltergeist activity or ghost activity or demonic activity. They call them demons at times. So that's tough.
Yeah. I think it could be. I think I know the experiences that I've had have not been pleasant. I wasn't necessarily scared in some of the instances, but they weren't pleasant. You know what I mean? So that is a great question. I don't think I do believe this. I do believe that they're all playing on the same side. I have to. There's someone I think you would be very interested in talking to. Another good friend of ours. I'll share that information when we're off recording. He may have that guy may have more insight than I would. The only thing I can say right now is I do believe that they're all playing on the same side, whatever it may be.
Yeah.
And that's including Bigfoot.
No, that very well could be. People like to ignore some of the stranger things that happen around Bigfoot encounters, and that's their prerogative if they want to do that. But you cannot throw the baby out with the bathwater.
Right. We have the same guy. I'll introduce you. He actually did a recording, and he's pretty well known. And he had one of his viewers send in a video. Well, instead of having the camera in front of him as he's walking on this path in the forest, he's got the video looking behind him. And it's the craziest thing, Shannon. You can see something on the path starting to manifest itself into this realm. It's the craziest footage. I'll connect you to him. You guys could talk that out. But yeah, very, very interesting individual.
All right, so I lied. One last question, I promise. This is it.
No, it's okay.
I know that things are peaceful. You don't have activity in your home now. I'm very happy to hear that. But does it ever cross your mind, or do you ever worry that you will see the twins or any of the other a-holes that have visited you in the past again?
That's funny. You know what? I have never had that thought. I can honestly tell you, I've never had that thought. Are they ever coming back? And maybe the reason I don't have that thought is because they're not allowed here. In my mind, and in my heart, and in my spirit, and in my soul, you are not welcome here. Not after what they did the first time. You are not welcome. That's just word to just. I have never once thought that at all.
No, that's good. And that's perfect.
A great question.
I mean, but it's perfect closing thoughts, because I think that we have to choose to let these things in. And if you say, nope, the wall is up, screw you, go somewhere else, then they have to abide by it.
That's exactly how I think of it. The wall is up. The perimeter is sealed.
The ice wall is impenetrable, so go away.
Yep.
Well, Michael, thank you so much for joining me today and sharing your experiences.
Absolutely. No problem. Thank you so much for having Angela on and I.